Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. I've got 7:59, close enough. I think we're almost all here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's get 1 or 2. Okay, so to recap from last time, in terms of the weighted average cost of capital, I want to kind of finish up this. I think there was one little minor correction I need to make on one thing, and then we will move on to the new material. Okay, so last time I think we got through most everything, and I think we went through an example of weighted average cost of capital. Is that correct? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and so once again, to reiterate, the formula for the before tax weighted average cost of capital, you're simply taking the loan to value ratio or the percentage of your capital stack that's attributable to debt, multiplying it by your cost of debt in terms of your interest rate, okay? And then you're adding that to basically your equity component in terms of what percentage of the deal is being financed with equity, then multiplying that by your cost of equity or return on equity. All right, is everybody clear with that? Yes? Mm-hmm. Then you go through the basic math to ultimately come up with, in this case, the weighted average cost of capital on a before tax basis of 7%. Okay? Another example of the same exact thing is if our cost of debt were to go down from 5% on a before tax basis to 3% on a before tax basis, you would simply insert that new interest rate here, do the same math, and then ultimately you end up with a new before tax cost of, or before tax weighted average cost of capital of 5.4%. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Yes? Okay. Now, first question. What is the purpose of weighted average cost of capital? Why do we go through this? What is the rationale? What is the reason why we go through this sort of calculation? Why do we care? You have no idea. Okay, but for what reason? Why do we care? From whose perspective are we looking at this from? Okay, the investor's perspective. So what is this number? When we get down to this number of this 7%, what is that really telling us about that investor specifically?
Not just the loan itself, that's what it's going to cost you overall for your business.
Okay, and so another way of looking at this would be, should this particular investor, if they're given an opportunity that there is something they can invest in that's going to yield a 10% rate of return, okay, should they invest in this?
In this?
I mean, in other words, should they invest, if there's an investment alternative that's available, that's a 10% rate of return, should they invest in it?
No. Opportunity.
Okay, one more time. One more time. Listen to what I am saying. If there is an investment alternative that is available to you at 10%, scratch this out. This has nothing to do with that at the moment. If there is an investment alternative that is yielding a 10% rate of return, in other words, something as simple as...
Comparison to what?
I thought we
Okay. Let's assume that we have a property that is generating $10,000 a year of net operating income, okay? And it has a 10% cap rate, or 10% rate of return, and its value is $100,000, okay? Very simply put, what does this represent? This represents, in essence, a before tax rate of return. Yes? Okay, so if this investment that they have found is generating a 10% rate of return and their weighted average cost of capital is 7%, should they invest in this, yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Why? Because this investment's rate of return exceeds their cost of capital. Okay? This is how much their money is costing them. Okay? Whatever their sources of that money are, this is what their money is costing them. So if there's an investment alternative that's yielding something greater than that, they should definitely invest in it. Now, if they found another investment alternative that maybe was yielding 5%, then we would say, absolutely not. It wouldn't make any sense because their cost of capital is greater than what the actual return on the investment is. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any question about that? Are we clear? Yes? No? Possibly could be.
Clear.
Okay. Now, we take this a step further and we do an after-tax weighted average cost of capital. Okay? Let's take a look. Okay? So, in this particular example, I've used pretty much the same numbers, all right? The only thing we have done is insert a tax rate. In this case, a tax rate of 28%, all right? So, what we do to calculate our weighted average cost of capital on an after-tax basis is simply to take the debt component piece, okay, which is pretty much just your cost of debt alone, that 5% interest rate, and multiply it by 1 minus the tax rate, which in this case would be 0.72. 1 minus 0.28 is 0.72. That is going to give us our after-tax cost of debt, which is the 0.036 or 3.6% as our after-tax cost of debt. Now the reason why it is less, if you remember from what we discussed last week, is because of the deductibility of the mortgage interest, okay? So therefore your after-tax cost of debt is a good thing from a tax perspective. The reason it's a good thing from a tax perspective is it allows you to deduct it fully from your taxable income to ultimately get, it translates into a lower cost of borrowing. In other words, it makes debt cheaper or even more cheaper than getting equity. Because equity, you don't get any tax benefit from, okay? The debt, you do, okay? So it is important that we calculate the after-tax cost of debt. So when we go through this, all you're gonna do is you're gonna separate out that one piece of the cost of debt times 1 minus the tax rate, multiply it by the loan-to-value ratio just like you've done before, divide that out, multiply that out, add that to, once again, your equity and your cost of equity, and that gives you, in this case, 5.88 versus the 7% that we had found previously in the before-tax cost of debt, okay? So the difference is basically about 1.12%. Yep.
Another thing last class?
That was a mistake.
Oh, that's different.
Oh, okay, yeah, 'cause that's something.
That's why I'm going over it again.
Okay.
Okay, so let me.
So it's not the before tax whack times.
You're not, no. Okay. After I began to think about it, I was like, no, that is not correct. This is the way it's supposed to be. You're only going to multiply the debt component by the 1 minus the tax rate, not the whole thing. Okay? All right? Now,
Can you invite
Can we get a
one
minute?
while we get
Can
this?
we get a couple minutes to get that down? Get our notes right?
the simple fact that Winston and Quincy both caught this, you get the bonus prize of a t-shirt or a beach towel.
Sweet. Yeah, I was a little bit confused. What was that, boy? It was out. My head flew up at the same time it was his flew up.
Okay, we got that? Now,
No, can I take a picture of that? I can't see.
I don't know what minutes it is.
okay. Now, the last little piece that we did not go over last time was an approach to valuation called the mortgage equity approach. All of this is in your book, by the way, okay? So don't get stressed out if you're like, okay, I can't get every little thing down. Obviously, all of this is in your book. All right. Now, one of the things that you want to be able to do is try to value the property based on the income the property is generating, based on the debt that is on the property, based on the equity that you're putting into the property, based on the tax rate. This is a very simple model that, to a certain extent, it's a variation, if you will, of ERV. Okay? If you sort of look at it, one of the key components of it is what? The net operating income. Okay? But instead of on the denominator having your cap rate, you're using your after-tax cost of equity as your interest rate, or the equivalent of some sort of rate of return. But what you're doing up here is you are specifically segmenting out the equity piece in terms of well, you're segmenting out what would ultimately translate into your equity piece by looking at your debt, okay? Because this represents, in essence, the return on the overall project, the net operating income. And then so from that, we're subtracting out the debt piece, which, what does that leave? Equity, okay? So this is really sort of your equity piece, even though it has the components up there of debt. What you're doing is you're subtracting out that debt piece from the overall cash return to give us the equity piece, and then you add that to whatever your overall debt amount is. Okay, so in this case, what we have with this particular project is a net operating income, which obviously we're all familiar with what that is, of $115,000. Then we have a cost of debt, or our interest rate, on a before-tax basis of 10%. We have our debt amount, in this case, of $800,000, meaning that what we're doing is we're saying $800,000, if that's our debt, times 10% would be $80,000. Okay? In this case, our tax rate that we're using is 20%. So 1 minus 0.2 would be 0.8. Okay, so this then simplifies down to basically our net operating income, and then minus our interest expense, if you will, on our debt, times 1 minus the tax rate. Then if we take that and we divide that by, in this case, our after-tax cost of equity, which is just given to us at 14%, then that simplifies down to 35,000 times 0.8 divided by 0.14, or 200,000 would be our equity component, and then adding that to our debt component of 800,000, which is also given to us, gives us the overall value of the property as $1 million. Now, what this simply represents is a very basic sort of valuation model predicated on what your cost of borrowing is, okay? And that's why it's called the mortgage equity approach, okay? Is that you're taking into account what your specific borrowing costs are as an investor, what your specific income tax rate is as an investor to come up with a valuation. And you're saying, well, why haven't we done this before? Well, once again, this is all considering the income on an after-tax basis for a specific investor, okay? All of the valuations that we have done prior to this have all been on a before-tax basis. They've all been predicated off of using net operating income or before-tax cash flow, yes? Okay? Every single other course, with the possible exception maybe of your accounting course, okay, you would have been looking at strictly before tax and NOI. Now that we are, now that we have kind of explored the world of after-tax cash flow and individual investor sort of rates of return, this is another metric that you can use to find out the valuation. Now, chances are what you're going to find is, depending on what your after-tax cost of equity is, that's going to change the valuation for you. So, very simply put, let's just do a quick minor modification to this. Well, actually, you need to do it from the board. Okay? Assuming all of this other stuff up here remains constant in terms of our debt amount, in terms of our cost of debt, and that the only thing that we actually end up changing is our after-tax cost of equity. So in this particular case, let's say that we take that 35,000 times 0.8, which is 28,000. Okay, and what we're saying is the valuation is $1 million if we've got a 14% after-tax cost of equity, which, why is that important to us? Well, in other words, that is the rate of return that we would need to get just on our equity piece, okay, on an after-tax basis. But what if that number were to go down to, let's say, 10%? How would that change the value of this particular project? So, in essence, what we would find is 28,000 divided by 10% would mean that the value of the equity would go up by $80,000, okay, to $280,000. Our cost of debt would remain constant at $800,000, meaning now we've got $1,080,000 as our new value. Okay, so thinking about that just for a second, if our cost of equity goes down, remember just even the basic ERV model for a second. If our required rate of return goes down, what does our value do? It goes up. Same thing is happening here. Okay? In other words, our cost of equity is going down from 14% to 10%, and as a result, that is causing that component of the value, the equity component, to go up from 200,000 to 280,000, giving us an overall valuation, meaning that we can pay more for the property. Why? Because we don't have to generate as high of a return for ourselves. We only have to generate a 10% rate of return instead of a 14% rate of return. Does that make sense? Conceptually, yes or no? Okay. Now, chances are the same sort of thing would happen to us if we also reduced our cost of debt. okay? Which we can go through and do that as well. But the point is, that I really want you to focus on, is this is just simple, a simple little model to help you to calculate the value of a property using just a few key component pieces of information. Just look at what you need here to come up with the value for the property. You just look at the variables that we would need. We need NOI, we need our cost of debt, we need our debt amount in dollars, we need our tax rate, we've already got the debt amount on the right hand side, and we need our after-tax cost of equity. And then with those, basically 5 variables, we are then able to come up with a value for the property. Okay? Does that make sense? Kyle?
So essentially this formula is, it's basically saying that adding debt gives you a higher value on the property, correct? Because if you were to diminish the debt, have no debt at all, then technically your value would be significantly lower. So is it saying that because of the tax basis, I'm assuming?
Yeah, okay, well, okay, you come up with a great point. So in this particular example, if we pretty much removed all indications of debt, okay? Let's just sort of try to simplify this. So we would have NOI, okay? Well, if we have no debt on the property, we have no cost of debt, we have no debt amount, and the tax rate is not relevant to us, right? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. And if we have no debt, we have this, we no longer have this. So all we're really left with then is our after-tax cost of equity to give us our value, which in essence is ERV. Does that make sense? And that's all we're really doing, is we're just simply modifying ERV to ultimately give us a more accurate valuation based upon the amount of debt that we're undertaking and the cost of that debt and our tax rate. That's all this is doing. Don't make it more complicated than what it is.
Go back to the previous slide, I didn't finish copying. The growth, actually, all of this material that I can copy. Oops. No, that's one.
That's it. That's all I've done this morning.
Well, the equation I have here is all of that numerator was divided by 0.14. The last one I saw there was only the left-hand side of the numerator was divided by 0.14, so. Okay, I copied it wrong, sorry.
Okay. All right. So any other questions? Nelson, you good?
No, good.
Okay. Okay. All right. So that takes us through all the stuff I think we need to make sure that from last week's discussion and then from this week's discussion, that wholly takes care of everything we need to know for the quiz that you're going to do in about an hour. Okay. So any questions from last week to clear up anything with regard to the lease versus own, all that sort of stuff? Are we good with that? Corporate real estate stuff. I think we pretty much covered everything, but any other sort of last minute questions on that? Because what we're going to do now is we're going to jump into new material. Specifically the handout that I gave you this morning. Okay. Did you give one of these? I thought I gave you one.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, one of the things that we want to do now, as we get you ready toward the last half of the semester, is we're going to have you start creating your own spreadsheets, okay? And specifically, We're gonna have you, obviously do this in Excel. And so what I've done is I've started us off with a relatively straightforward problem, okay? Here's the problem, here's a solution, okay? What you're gonna have to do is build your own spreadsheet to replicate this, okay? Not just punch the hard code the numbers in, but actually set it up to where if we change the numbers, obviously the numbers down below will change, okay? Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sit up here and I'm gonna go through, I'm gonna create it from scratch, just like you're gonna have to, okay? Now you can follow along as I do it, ask questions, but we're gonna try to keep it relatively straightforward, okay? And just set it up pretty much like it is here on the piece of paper, okay? Any questions? Okay, so grab your laptop, open it up to Excel. Blow it up here so you can hopefully see a little bit better.
Ours doesn't have to be like yours, right?
It can be different, I don't care. As long as you ultimately come up with the correct answers and that sort of thing, and it's created by you. It's not something that you're just modifying, something that you got from somewhere else, okay? All right, so let's just sort of start out, and to keep this relatively simple, I'm gonna actually go through and kind of explain what an equity participation loan is along the way. So we're just gonna start up here with just a simple sort of header, equity participation loan example. Okay, so we're gonna put in a few of the variables and then I'll explain what the equity participation loan is. Okay, so the project cost, the land, project cost for the building. Okay, so for the land, 300,000. For the building, 2.5 million. Okay. Let's skip down a little bit. Okay. Loan amount. 1.8 million. We'll get back to formatting this in a minute. Okay, so you can see all I have done up to this point is just pretty much just put in the inputs, pretty much as they're given to us with a little spacing in there, just if, in the case that we want to potentially go back and we want to add anything. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and kind of clean these up a little bit in terms of formatting to add dollar signs and percentage. So, assuming everybody do that. So all I'm going to do is highlight each one, and then go in and then determine, well, is that a, in this case, currency? So 300,000. Percentage. Kick the decimal out there a little bit. So all that's been formatted. All right, now what we're going to do is I'm going to just arbitrarily, just because of where we are on the page, I'm going to start at line 30 and then start putting in the information that we've got down below, all right, which is obviously our income statement. I'm going to put it in slightly differently, only because of what we have become accustomed to in terms of the format. And what I mean by that is as follows. So instead of calling it gross rent, I'm going to call it potential gross income, since that's the term that I consistently have been using. All right, or potential gross income. And minus vacancies and collection losses. In this case, we have no other income, but I'm going to go ahead and put a line in there just in case. Or sorry, plus other income. And then instead of calling it net rent, I'm going to call it effective gross income. You don't have to use the nomenclature that I'm using. I'm only doing that just simply because, once again, this is what we have become accustomed to, or at least the way that I tend to present it to you. Okay? And then from that, subtract out total operating expenses. Which gives us our net operating income. From that, subtract out annual debt service. They're calling it mortgage payment. Now, this is where we are adding something brand new that we have not talked about, which is participation payment. Talk about that here in just a minute. And that's going to give us before tax cash flow. Okay. We'll skip on down. Once again, just getting the headings in there for right now. Okay, here I'm going to deviate a little bit from what they've got, only because I want the transparency of what's actually happening. I'm going to put a line multiplied by marginal tax rate. Skip a line there. Okay. All right. So all I've done is pretty much put the headings in, made one little minor modification down here at the bottom in terms of inserting that marginal tax due and then putting a line there between the tax due and the before tax cash flow. Okay? So at this point, we are ready to begin to kind of populate each of these cells. Okay? So the first one that we're going to start with is the potential gross income. Well, in this case, they've actually already told us what that number is. They've told us that our year one gross rent is $525,000. So all we have to do is we want to cell reference that. We don't want to just type in 525,000. So we just want to hit equal and then go up to where that 525,000 is and then hit enter. So in this particular case, the cell reference, if you were using the same spacing as I did, it just happens to be cell C15. Okay? Everybody with me at this point? Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of continue down, and you should be able, now what I would actually advocate that you do is try to figure this out on your own, because you're going to have to. Okay? I'm walking you through this, but you're going to have to figure this out. All right, so where are we going to get the vacancy and collection losses from? Well, vacancy rate up here. So what we're going to do, we're going to multiply basically the potential gross income times the vacancy rate. And that's going to pop in to that line. So the way we're going to do that, or at least the way I'm going to do it, is I'm going to just hit equal, and then I'm going to cell reference the cell right above it, multiplied by, and then the cell reference for the vacancy rate. So in my spreadsheet, it's equal C30 times C19. That gives us vacancy and collection losses of 26,250, which matches up to the sheet that we were given. Okay, everybody see that? Okay, moving on down the page. Okay, we have no other income. I just inserted that just because that's typically what we have always done. So I'm just going to put a 0 in there for other income. All right. So now to calculate the effective gross income, or what they're calling net rent, I'm simply going to take equal, and then I'm going to go up here to the potential gross income minus the vacancy and collection losses plus the other income, and then hit enter. So we should get 498,750. Yep.
Is it a fully amortizing loan, or
In this case, it is.
no release date?
Yes, it is, but it's annual.
Yeah.
Annual payments, but it is fully amortized. Okay? Our operating expenses, all right, so in this case, the operating expenses are told to us to be 16% of gross rent, okay? So we're gonna go take our gross rent of 525,000, and then we're gonna multiply it by the cell reference up here of the 16%. So we should get 84,000.
Wait, which one was 16%? Did I put 16?
Okay. For operating expenses. you're going to take the effective gross, or I'm sorry, you're going to take the potential gross income, in this case, times the 16% up here of PGI.
That's, oh, put 5.
Okay? All right? Then to calculate NOI, we're simply going to subtract out those operating expenses from the EGI. So equal the 498,750 minus the 84,000, which should give us the 414,750. Okay? So far we're matching up. Okay? Now then, for annual debt service, okay, here is where we're going to use the payment function. Okay? So, on the annual debt service line, it equal PMT, open parentheses, and then you've got 3 or 4 variables that you're going to have to put in, really 3. You're going to put in the rate of interest, the number of periods, and the loan amount, or present value. Okay?
If you do the function, it's a little bit easier for some of the people that don't like
Well,
know. So.
we need to do it this way.
Okay.
Okay.
Because it's the same thing. It just shows it
I
to-
understand, but
Okay.
we need to understand how to put this in using the payment function. Okay? All right, so the rate in this case is just going to be the annual rate. Okay? Here we're not going to have to make any adjustments for it being monthly. We're just simply going to be able to put in the annual rate of interest. All right? To do that, all we have to do is once we've put in the equal payment, we're going to scroll up to where the rate of interest is on the loan, which is the 9.5%. After you scroll on top of it, you hit comma. Okay. Now we're going to put in the term, which is the number of years. Scroll up to the 30. Hit comma. And then the loan amount. Okay. Which is the 1.8 million. Okay? So for me, it is simply cell referencing the interest rate, the term, and the loan amount. Okay? So for me, it's cells C8, comma, C9, C6. Okay? Now, once I've done that, I close the parentheses. Okay, now it gives that number to me as a negative number. Okay, 183,025. Well, if you notice, that matches up with what we've got on the actual spreadsheet, except that it's a negative number. We want to make it a positive number. Okay, so to do that, go back up, click on the actual formula, and then before the payment, before the PMT, put a negative sign. That will make it positive. Okay, so all we did, once again, is simply add a negative sign there in front of the payment. Okay, all right, that gives us our 183,025. Okay, now, here is where we can begin to talk about what is this participation payment business. Okay. All right, so this example, this problem, I selected because this is, to a certain extent, this is kind of a precursor to what we're going to see in a couple of weeks from now, which is when we start getting into deal structure, okay? And specifically, whenever you have a partner in a real estate deal, so that you may have to pay that partner a certain percentage of the income being generated from the property, in addition to some sort of maybe percentage of the value of the property as it increases potentially over time. Well, in this particular case, we're calling this an equity participation loan, okay? So what is happening here is potentially you have this partner that may be contributing toward the equity up front in the deal. They don't actually tell you what, I mean, in other words, all they're really telling you is what the loan amount is and what the building value is and that sort of thing. They're not really telling you what kind of deal you made with this person, okay, that's your business partner, but what the piece of the deal that matters, though, is that for whatever their contribution was, you are going to give them 18% of your net operating income each year above and beyond a base value of $250,000. Does that make sense? So in other words, if your property makes $250,000, you don't owe them a penny. If it makes $250,000 and one extra dollar, of that extra dollar, you owe them what? 18 cents. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes or no? Okay, so what we've got to do is we've got to construct a little formula to basically reflect that. All right? So use the logic of simply thinking about what is it that's going to help us to calculate that participation payment. Well, in this case, the logic is going to be, if we've got NOI of whatever it is, you're going to take whatever that NOI is and you're going to subtract out 250,000 from whatever the actual NOI is, and then whatever is left, you're going to take and you're going to multiply that by 0.18, and that is going to be the amount of participation payment. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so now we've got to put that into Excel. Okay, so just to look, let's just start out with the numbers that we've actually got here. The 414,750 is our NOI. All right, so if we take the 414,750, we subtract out the 250, that leaves us with 164,750 that is subject to the participation. Okay, so we multiply that by 18%, and that gives us 29,655. Okay, now let's look on the sheet under year one under participation payment, 29,655, right on the money. Okay, is everybody with me? Yes, no, possibly, could be. Okay, now let's put it into Excel. Okay, so here's the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to take equal, and I am going to open the parentheses, and I'm going to go up, I'm going to take NOI minus, and then I'm going to go up to where we have this participation payment. Well, in this case, it is a hard-coded number, so I'm going to go ahead and make it a hard-coded response. We can obviously change that. Matter of fact, let's just do that. I'm going to put it here in that cell. Okay, so once again, we've subtracted that out. Now we need something to multiply it by. The 18. Okay, now what I need to do is up here where I did that. Oops. I can, but not right now. Okay. All right. So. All right. So once again, all I've done is I've taken equal, open parentheses, net operating income line minus the 250,000, which was what I did was I created a separate cell up here with this 18% over 250,000, and the reason I did that instead of hard coding it is what if we want to change that threshold at some point to something else? Okay, so we just made that a separate cell for itself, and then multiplied by 0.18. Okay, so there we've got our number. Okay, we format it for currency. Okay. Everybody good with that? Okay, now, okay, so.
Multiplied by the 18%,
right? Right, up above. Now, the last one right there for the before tax cash flow. And one of the things that I did over here on purpose that hopefully you picked up on was I put what the operation is in terms of whether you're adding or subtracting or whether it's something that's going to be equal to something, okay? Unlike the example here, they don't actually tell you that, so if you don't know, that could be a little bit confusing. So in this case, all we're going to do to get our before tax cash flow is to take our net operating income minus our annual debt service minus our participation payment, giving us our before tax cash flow, okay? So equal the NOI minus the annual debt service minus the participation payment. 202,069.95, rounded off to 070 in your example. Okay, everybody good? All right. Now, we jump down to the tax piece of this. Okay, now if you remember from our discussions on the tax, this whole next piece is what I refer to as just a tax subroutine, the whole purpose of which is just to come up with what is my tax due, okay? The numbers that are used in here, specifically the depreciation number, is not an actual cash expenditure. It is simply a calculation you were doing for tax purposes. And the interest on the mortgage, obviously you're making a full mortgage payment, but you're only getting to write off for tax purposes just the interest piece, okay? Everybody with me on that? And then the participation payment, then we obviously get to write off that. So let's just start. What I'm going to do is to simply equal and then cell reference the net operating income and hit equal. Now, with the depreciation, in this particular example, since they're already giving it to you, and we'll go through and show you once again how to get to this number, but right now, let's just go ahead and just take what they've given to us above. So we'll cell reference the depreciation for year one. Okay? And then now, for the interest on the mortgage, okay? There are a couple of different ways that we can approach this, all right? But before we do that, let's do this. Let's go ahead and skip on down to participation payment and hit equal, go up, capture our participation payment, plop it in, and then also go capture our marginal tax rate and plop it in. Okay, and go ahead and do the calculations without putting in our interest on the mortgage just for the moment. All right, so for our taxable income, we are net operating income minus our depreciation minus our interest on our mortgage minus our participation payment. And then our tax due is simply going to be our taxable income times our tax rate. Okay. And those numbers aren't going to match up to the sheet because we haven't put in our interest on our mortgage yet. Okay. Now, in this case, let's see, cumulative interest. All right, so the function we're going to use is the cumulative interest payment function, CUMIPMT, okay? And so whenever you type that in, then it should pull up, here are the bits and pieces of information that we're going to have to put in. Specifically, the rate of interest, the number of periods, the loan amount, the start period, and the end period. So this is very similar to a certain extent the kind of information you've got to put in on the calculator in terms to get amortization information, okay? So the rate is just simply going to go back up to that 9.5% above. Okay, so we scroll up to the 9.5%. Hit comma. And the number of periods in this case is going to be the 30 years, so we're going to scroll up to that one. Hit comma. And then the loan amount or the present value is given to us up there of the 1.8 million. So we're gonna put that in, comma. Then we've got start period and end period. Okay? I'm sorry?
1-1, right?
Yeah. So we're looking at just for the first year. So in this case, 1, comma, 1, and then close the parentheses. Oops. And type. So there it is. Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm sorry. What I did wrong was apparently it does need the type at the end. In this case, it's a question of whether it's beginning of the period or end of the period. And so for end of the period, you're going to put in 0. So specifically, let me just show you. Negative. Okay, so let me blow this up a little bit. All right, so what you should have down here to match me be equal, then the negative sign, cumulative interest payment, open parentheses, then the first cell reference is going to be the interest rate, comma, the number of periods, comma, the present value, comma, and then period number 1, comma, through period number 1, comma, and then 0 for the type, which is simply end of the period, just like on the calculator, okay? And then close parentheses, all right? So when you do that, you should match up with me in terms of getting the 171,000. Do you?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Now, all right, so let's just see. Okay, and are we matching up here with tax due? Okay, 35,552.72 for tax due. Yep, we're matching up with that. Well, you should be.
Yeah.
Okay.
The taxable income is wrong.
Okay, taxable income should just simply be net operating income minus depreciation minus the interest minus participation payment. You match up with all these? Okay. All right. So hopefully now you're down to this point. Yes? Okay. Now all we have to do is just pop in some of the numbers from above. So take our before tax cash flow from above of the 202,069, pop that in there. Take our tax due, pop it in there. And then simply subtract one from the other. And we should end with 166,517. Okay? Everybody good? All right. All right. Now, got all the numbers there for the first year. Okay? In this case, if you want to, put a little heading there above that one. Year 1, then we're going to have year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5. All right? So what I want you to do is to see if you can figure out how to match up with the numbers. Now that we've done the full first year, see if you can figure out the second year through the 5th year. Now what you're going to have to do starting off with potential gross income is you're going to have to apply a growth rate to the rent. And the growth rate is told to you as being 8%. Okay? So you're going to have to basically take this number, multiply it by 1 plus the growth rate of 8% to come up with year 2, and then that number times 1.08 to come up with year 3, times 1.08, times 1.08. Does that make sense? Okay? So, see if we can pop that in real quick.
Can I see it?
So the only issue I'm having is trying to, like, I said, set up.
I can see that. Okay.
Set up where trying to put the lock in. How do you
Okay, I'll show you that. Basically, it's the difference between a static cell reference and a dynamic cell reference.
Which one?
Okay. So, all right, so that's what we've got for that first year. Now, here's the thing, okay, and this is the question Kyle was asking. What if you want to lock in that interest rate? In other words, listen. What you want is to be able just to copy this all the way across, yes? Okay. If you just simply try to copy this as is all the way across, what is going to happen is this number will copy and this number will copy and so forth, what you want. But what you don't want to have happen is your interest rate to copy over, because what it's going to be doing is it's going to be searching for an interest rate here, and an interest rate here, and an interest rate there. You want to hold this interest rate piece in a fixed position, which means it is a static cell reference. It stays the same, okay? Whereas you want the dollar amount of the income to be a dynamic cell reference, meaning it changes, okay? Well, to make this one static, what you do is you put little dollar signs in front of, you can do F4, or you can put the dollars, insert the dollar signs in there, okay? All right, so it's going to look like this. Everybody see that? Hit return. Now, once you've got that in there, you should be able to then take the bottom of that and then just drag it over to year 5. Oops. We may have to stretch the cells out a little bit. Okay, and we match up. All very magical. Okay. Everybody good with that? Okay. Now, let's look at our collection losses formula. Okay, what is our collection losses formula doing? It's basically taking the potential gross income and multiplying it by a fixed percentage up above. Kind of the same sort of thing. So what we want to do is we want to modify this formula as well. We want to take the C30, if you will, keep it the same, but we want to make the C19 a static cell reference. So if the dollar sign there, okay? And then just simply copy over, and there we go. Pretty straightforward. Okay, other income, we don't have any. We're just going to put zeros all the way across for other income. All right. Now, our effective gross income, given that that is all contained, if you will, within this column, this one we can just copy over. Okay? So you should just be able just to drag the bottom of it operating expenses, we've got another situation with a dynamic and a static cell reference. Okay? So in this one, we need to make the C17 static. And then we should just be able to copy over. Okay.
What's that?
Okay, just like the one previously, all we're doing is you're going to make the C17 static, so you can copy it over. Okay, the net operating income, since it's all there in the same column, we can just simply copy it over. And obviously there's a lot quicker ways of doing this, but once again, I'm just trying to make it as straightforward as possible. Okay, our annual debt service. Okay, now this one,
There's something wrong with your operating expenses.
The way that I think it was.
Yeah, I have a different number.
okay,
One
hold on.
plus, it's,
Let me see here, what have they got?
Should
16% of gross rent.
be year one plus year one.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, oh,
it's year one
Yeah, yeah.
times 1 plus the interest rate, gives you the number.
oh, it didn't,
Operating expenses is growing by 7%, so it should be that same.
Yeah.
oh, okay, oh, my bad.
Year
I'm so-
one
okay,
times-
okay, I'm with you now. Doing it, I was thinking about how I would normally do it, but no, that's not the way they're actually asking for it. Okay, all right, so scratch that.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of tricky.
Yep, my bad. Okay, so what they're actually doing is, for your operating expense, it is 16% of gross rent for the first year, but thereafter, it's actually just simply growing at 7%. Okay? So all you're really gonna do here for year 2 is you're gonna take the year 1 and you're gonna multiply it by 1 plus that growth rate of 7%. Okay, and then we're going to do that as an absolute reference to copy it across. Okay, now we match. Who caught that? Winston or you?
Oh, he stated it.
You're gonna tell. There you go.
Steve can have one this last class.
I'm going to beat him on it too. That's perfect.
Okay, let's see. All right, so now we're down to annual debt service. Okay, so for annual debt service, in this particular case, the debt service is not going to change from one year to the next. So we can do this a couple of different ways. The easiest would just simply to be to cell reference the one right before it or the year right before it, and then just copy that across. Okay. All right, and our participation payment, let's take a good close look at that, make sure we don't, okay, so on this one, it is simply going to be the, we're going to need to do a couple of static cell references. So the C35 is going to be okay the way it is, but we're going to need a static E11 and C11. Okay.
How do you copy it straight across?
What I do is I grab the bottom right-hand corner with a, and then hold down the mouse. Oops.
You can also copy and paste.
Yeah, I just and then drag over.
With the drag syntax there.
Okay. Okay, and then before tax cash flow, this one, yeah, we can just copy straight over. We don't really need to do anything weird with that one. So Copy it all the way over. Oops. Too far. Okay, and we match up with that, that's good. Okay. All right. The NOI, we can copy that over without making any modifications. Oops.
So Dr. Corrigan, operating expense, if you were to ask that on a test question, a little more clear as far as how you want it.
I would need to, yeah. All right. Now here, they actually give you the depreciation. Now what? Okay. Why is the depreciation amount different in the first year than the subsequent years?
The half month,
The mid-month convention. Okay. So they actually give you the depreciation amount for the first year of 87,121, and then for the second year and beyond, we just simply are going to go up and capture for the moment the 90,909, which they have given to us. And then from that point forward, we will just copy it over. And in this case, yep, we're going to have to absolute the cell reference. Copy it over. All right. And then the interest on the mortgage. Okay, now, on this one, what we can do, we're going to have to absolute pretty much almost everything. We're going to do the C8 is going to be an absolute, C9 is going to be an absolute, and the C6 is going to be an absolute. And for simplicity purposes, now we can do this a couple of ways. We can just leave it like this and we can change it from year to year, that's fine. But another way that we could do it is as follows. We could cell reference this one. Well, no, actually we can't because of the way we did it. I was going to say we could cell reference the heading of year 1, year 2, year 3, but the way that we did that, we actually did year 1 as opposed to year and then 1 below it. Okay? But that would have been another way.
You're saying that if you had a heading on the spreadsheet, instead of putting year 1, you just put the number 1, maybe up above it, you put
Yes.
year, and then it would drag that over.
Yeah. That would be one way of doing it, as opposed to having to go in and change each one. But we'll go ahead and do it this old school way of just kind of taking that, copying it over initially, and then going into each one and then line editing it. So this one becomes 2-2.
What's the zero again?
The zero is just into the payment, it's just like on the calculator, the end mode versus begin mode.
Begin.
And this one becomes 3-3. And this one 4-4. And then this one is 5-5.
So 0 equals n?
Yep. And 1 equals begin. Okay. So let's just see if we match up with all those. Yep. Yay. Okay. All right. We've got 15 minutes to try to finish this up. All right. So, okay, participation payment. In this case, we're just dragging that down from above, so we can copy that over. The taxable income, that's all coming from the same column, so we can just copy that over as is. Okay. The tax rate, that is a fixed cell reference, so we're going to go in there, make that static. We'll copy that over. Tax due, that's all in the same column, so we don't need to do any static cell references. Just copy that over. Okay, so we match up with that.
Something's off. taxable income, we just went straight through, right? Why?
Yep, that one should be copied straight over. Just make sure that all the taxable income number should be, or just, it's just simply NOI minus depreciation, minus interest on the mortgage, minus participation payment. That's all it is. Copied over. Okay. Before tax cash flow, that's one we can just copy directly over, as is tax due, as is the after tax cash flow. So in this one, to save ourselves some time, we can actually highlight all three of them simultaneously, take the bottom, and then copy it over. And boom. Okay? And we're matched up perfectly with everything. Okay? Okay, everybody good? Are you matching up now with everything? You should be down to the very bottom line on the after-tax cash flow. Matching up with that, the 256, 841. Okay. Okay. Now the only other thing that they ask you to do in this particular problem is to calculate the cash flows to the lender. So I'm going to skip down to, just say line 54, and just type in cash flows to lender, and right above that, I'll just put in for year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. There's only 4 years that we're doing this for, just to be consistent with what they've got there. Okay, so how do we get this cash flow to the lender? Okay, all we're going to be doing is you're going to be adding together the participation payment and the mortgage payment. Okay, so the annual debt service plus the participation payment.
So they're comparing the investor to lender.
Yes. So in this case, this is the other piece of this. So in this case, our lender is also our investor, okay? And the idea to sort of think about it from this is that your lender doesn't have to be a bank. Your lender can be a high net worth individual. So what you're basically saying is this high net worth individual is going to loan us money at 9.5%, but they are going to also get that, whatever it is, 18% of the NOI above the 250,000, and they're going to get 15% of the price appreciation in the asset. Well, we haven't. This problem doesn't even get into the valuation of the asset. That's just an extra piece of information. But so here, what we're simply saying is, how much is the lender actually getting in raw cash dollars? Well, it's going to be the mortgage payment plus participation payment. All right, so all we have to do is then, once you've got that little calculation, copy that across, and we're done with what they've asked for this problem. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, any questions on that? Now, what could be the case in this, and once again, they don't tell you, okay? This is very limited in the amount of information they're actually providing to you. This could be a situation of where the reason why the lender is potentially getting this is that the lender could be offering you a lower than normal interest rate. Well, 9.5%, this was obviously an old problem from years ago whenever the interest rates were much higher. But it could be they're offering you a lower interest rate in exchange for that participation payment. It also, once again, could be, as I was describing, you've got an investor that's giving you maybe the cash to do this deal. You're taking on the management responsibilities affiliated with the deal, and they're putting in all the money, and all they want is that 9.5% plus a participation payment. You get to walk away with everything else. Does that make sense?
Where's everything?
Well, everything else in this particular case is an after-tax cash flow of $166,000. Okay. Make sense? Okay. Feel reasonably good about that? Okay, so the reason why we did this today is within a couple of weeks, one of the things that we're going to be doing, you're going to do two different things. One is you're going to be given a couple of case studies, much like this one, that you're going to have to do from scratch. Okay? Same kind of setup, same kind of preparation. And what I'll probably do is break you into two groups. One of you will do case study one will do case study two. Even allow you to work together, and then at the end of that class session, then you kind of present it, and you're done with that, okay? Then, the next time or so, I'm gonna give you another sort of case study that you're gonna individually do, and then you're gonna present that in whatever that is. Take a look here and make sure I'm in week 13. So basically, we're not actually going to do these case studies until July the 23rd. So we've got a few weeks before you really have to even, begin to think about them, okay? But right now, this is just sort of a precursor to what you're going to have to be able to do on your own, okay? So my point with this today is, with this kind of information, you should be able to get to where we got today. Now, the difference is, obviously, I'm not going to give you the solution down below, okay? You're going to have to do your best to try to come up with what that solution is, and the part that you're going to have to, I'm not going to force you to memorize these steps, but the point being is you're going to have to figure out what belongs and what doesn't, okay? And there's not going to be that much variation from what you've seen here, but the point being is you're going to have to know what you're having to come up with. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Okay, well, with that, you've got 5 minutes to do whatever last minute things you need to do, and then we'll do quiz 5. Yep.
Can I ask a question on the chapter 15? So on the after-tax cash flow, difference between owning and leasing.
Yep.
Could you just go back and tell me the difference? We get different IRRs, we have IRR owning, IRR leasing, IRR difference. Now, how do those three correlate?
They don't.
So the IRR for the difference, what is that exactly?
That is simply looking at the incremental value of leasing, or I'm sorry, owning versus leasing. In other words, in virtually all cases, I mean, there are always rare circumstances. It's always going to be better financially to own rather than lease because of the tax benefits that you receive associated with ownership and the price appreciation affiliated with ownership. But what you're trying to do is to say, well, how much better is it for me to own than to lease? And that's where that incremental difference calculation comes into play. This is simply saying, it is this much better for me.
Okay.
Right?
No, that doesn't necessarily mean if you have another investment. Let's say your incremental difference is 16%, you have alternate investment 20%. There's no go.
It is simply saying this is the incremental value of owning this asset versus leasing. That's it.
Can I see slide 1 again?
Okay, which part?
First slide, entire slide.
That was the after-tax weighted average cost of capital.
That's where I'm confused about it.
Okay, once again, this quiz is open book, open notes, open computer. What was that? Huh? I'm just, he wanted me to put it up, so we have a couple seconds, and I'm gonna take it down. Quiz is officially starting at 9:30, so we still got 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna send it to you. Okay.
That's not, that comes on the test, right, or on the quiz?
Again, open book, open notes, open computer. It's 2 or 3 words. Actually, 2 words, sufficient.